in the middle of this? Okay, I'll keep an eye out for the thumbs up and the thumbs down. So first of all, I'm so sorry that I can't join you at the conference today. I've never missed a Wolfram conference, and I feel really sorry not to be able to say hello to everybody and catch up with everybody like we normally do. I caught COVID last weekend, and unfortunately, I've still got symptoms and I'm still positive. And I just could not bear the thought of passing it on to anybody else. So please accept my apologies this time around. What I will do in the next 30 minutes is just give you an update about the TREATWolfram clinical trial, because I know so many of you are invested in this, and we've had such fantastic support from Wolfram Syndrome UK. And I know that Dr. Diaz is going to try and be there later on this morning, and we'll be around to answer any questions in person if you have. So I'm going to move my slides on, and I can see you can see it. So this takes me back 14 years to a meeting held in Paris, the first meeting of people interested in trying to research and understand Wolfram. And it was organized by Nolwenn, Tracy's opposite number in Paris. And she really brought everybody together and says, you've got to work together to try and find a treatment for Wolfram. And the picture's quite nice because you might be able to see me in the back row. I'm sort of hidden behind Fumi, but Dr. Fumi Arano is there in the front row, and I think he may be with you today. So if you are, thanks for joining, Fumi. And this really just shows what's happened since 2009. Along the top, what I've tried to explain is what you have to do to get from finding the gene that causes Wolfram to getting a treatment to the clinic. So on that top line, starting by finding the gene, this was done by Professor Alan Permit in the late 1990s. And then with lots of work from different people, from Fumi and others and ourselves, finding out what does that gene do. Once you find out what the gene does, going across from left to right, you find out what's the mechanism. Why did it cause the condition of Wolfram? And once you found why it causes it, you think, can you find a treatment that will intervene and stop that process happening? Once you found a treatment, you then have to test it in what's called a clinical trial and prove that it works. If you can prove it works, the National Health Service has got a system called early access to medicines or treatments and will allow you to give it to people in the clinic while you're waiting for it to be licensed. And that process is applying to health regulators to license the medicine to be used for a new reason for Wolfram, and then it could be prescribed to everybody in the clinic. Now, below that middle line, you can see the dates. On the left-hand side is the International Wolfram Workshop, where we met, and Nolwenn charged us all with working together to find a treatment. And in 2013, my colleague, Dr. Nagy, found a target and had understood a mechanism and a target to treat, and then did a screen and found some medicines. In 2015, we applied to the medicines regulators to do a clinical trial and got their advice how to do it. And then we got funding and ethics approval to go ahead in 2018. In 2019, on the right-hand side, the first sites opened in Birmingham, and the first patients took part in their first visit. And then in 2020, Spain, France, and Poland opened their sites and came on board. The last patient to have their first visit was in 2021. And the last visit from any patient in the trial will be this time next year into 2024. And then we'll be able to analyze the results of the trial. So that just shows you really that it's taken at least 15 years to get to this point where we've got to. And thank you for bearing with us with this. So this picture is borrowed from Professor Fumi Arano, and he may show it if he's talking later. All I'm trying to show is that there's a whole range of different treatments under development to try and work for Wolfram. From the left-hand side to doing gene therapy, to the right-hand side to trying different medicines to work. And valproate, or the one we're trying, is at the top there on the right, valproic acid, and it works at the end of this pathway, at the very final bit of it, when the disease mechanism is causing cells to die. And by working at that very end mechanism and stopping cells dying, we hope we can actually help the most numbers of people with Wolfram, whatever the underlying mechanism is going to be. So that's where we're positioned on this pathway. And this came about because of my colleague, Dr. Zhuja Naji, a very impressive scientist in Birmingham, who had this great idea and observation that in your cells in your body, in Wolfram syndrome, they're not as healthy, or they're not as well as cells should be. And the reason is that each cell, instead of dividing properly and multiplying, can go around a cell cycle and fall over. And these little black men on here represent chemicals that can hold the cells in a stable position to recover and get better. And she showed that one of these little black men, a chemical called P21-CYP, the levels were quite low in our Wolfram models, but if you increase them with medicines such as sodium valproate, you could keep cells alive and they could recover. And this was really important because it allowed us a way into finding a treatment for Wolfram. So sodium valproate is a medicine that's been around for 50 years easily, and it's treated millions and millions of people for a different condition, for epilepsy. We know it gets into the brain and can protect cells. It keeps cells, helps them to recover and to grow normally again. And we know that it treats the underlying disease mechanisms in Wolfram. And lots of models have shown that it's really good at protecting brain cells. And at the end of the day, that's what we were trying to do. So that's why we've gone for this medicine called sodium valproate to try and work. We had to go involve regulators at a very early stage, because if we miss them out, when we come to try and get the medicine licensed for use in the clinic, they could say, no, you haven't done the studies properly. We're not happy with your conclusions. So we went to great efforts to involve the European Medicines Agency, colleagues in North America, the FDA, and colleagues in the UK. And they gave us advice about how to design a trial, how to do the studies, to have all the information they need to approve the medicine at the end of the trial. So that's why we've had to go through designating sodium valproate as a special medicine, an orphan medicine for Wolfram, and going to the regulators to advise about how to do a trial so that they'll accept the results at the end of it. So we've done all that just as a belt and braces approach to do that. And then they're the ones who advised us what sort of test we would have to do to prove that sodium valproate works in Wolfram. And they wanted us to do what we now know as a double-blind study, so that people taking part don't know if they're on the medicine or the dummy. And the doctors looking after them don't know if they're on the medicines or the dummy. And that's to try and remove any possibility of bias in this. And then that people would be allocated to the treatment or the dummy placebo randomly, like by the toss of a coin, so that we couldn't have any bias in that as well. And that we would check sodium valproate levels on people to make sure it works. And if we did this study to the most stringent recommendations that they have, they would accept if we didn't quite demonstrate that the medicine worked completely, but as long as the trend was in the right direction, they would accept that as good evidence. So we're basically giving ourselves an insurance policy just in case the treatment works, but not at strong enough levels to prove it statistically. We would still be able to give it to people in the clinic. And then we wanted to see, how do you tell whether a treatment is working in Wolfram or not? And we considered lots of different things, including MRI scans, tests of balance, hearing tests, eye tests, and diabetes tests. And in the end, we went for eye tests because it's something that we can measure on everybody. and because you told us that it was the most important thing for people here. So sometime earlier, we'd asked Wolfram Syndrome UK, French colleagues, the Snow Foundation colleagues in Spain, what they thought was the most important thing to try and get to to improve with treatment. And all 4 patient groups put vision as the top of the list. Now, any treatment we do, therefore, we need to be able to measure and see if it helps vision, but we're really hoping that this treatment will help everything else as well, including balance and brain function and more generally. But we've gone for vision because it's the thing that it was the easiest to measure. And as you know, people taking part in the UK are also having brain scans, and we'll be measuring all those brain scans to see if we can show that the brains are stabilized by the treatment as well. So I've shown this picture before, but I'm trying to demonstrate why the study is quite long. And you can see on here information about vision from our colleague, Professor Tammy Hershey in St. Louis Wolfram Clinic. And you can see on the left-hand side, on the vertical axis, the vision. And a vision of 0 is 20/20 vision or perfect vision. And a vision of 2 means that vision is down to you're able to count fingers in front of your face only. And on the horizontal axis at the bottom is the age of people from 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. And each individual little colored line is an individual person with Wolfram attending the St. Louis Research Clinic, having their eyes tested and followed up every year for several years. And you can see all those different colored lines are sloping from the bottom left end of the graph to the top right end of the graph, showing that over time, the vision gradually gets worse. And the solid middle red line going up diagonally in the middle is the average rate of progression from everybody in that clinic with Wolfram over a period of about 15 years. And the second solid line, the slight with a less slope below it, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to slow that loss of vision by at least that line, and if not, stop the loss of vision altogether if we can. And what you can see in the blue brackets is that it takes 3 years to follow people from one point to another point to see those 2 red lines separate in a way that you can measure the difference. And that's why this study is a 3-year study, so that we can measure that difference in vision between the people taking sodium valproate and the people taking dummy. And what we're hoping is that difference will be as wide as possible to show that the sodium valproate works in slowing that loss of vision. So we've got 6 sites open to recruitment, 2 in Birmingham, and I've got a picture of Dr. Renica Diaz there, who is hoping to attend today, and Dr. Ben Wright, who leads the adult service. In Poland, Professor Wojciech Milanowski, who's a children's doctor based there, who looks after a children's clinic. In Paris, Dr. Christophe Aussaud, who's an eye doctor based in the Pompidou Center in Paris. And in Montpellier, the south of France, Professor Ruberti, who's Dr. Raj Gupta's opposite number. She's a children's neurology doctor. And on the bottom left in Almeria in Spain, you've got Dr. Gemma Esteban, who looks after the Spanish Wolfram Association with patients. And each of these clinics have been very kindly recruiting people with Wolfram. So it's a truly international effort to take part in this study. And they are being absolutely fantastic to keep this study going. And then it's all being coordinated from Birmingham through a clinical trials unit. Now, this is a group of over almost 200 people now who are experts in looking after clinical trials with rare diseases and cancer diseases. It's one of the biggest centers in Europe, and they've got lots of active trials going on at the moment. And they've really experts at recruiting people to take part in studies. And they've got experts in rare disease trials, and also talking to regulators to get treatments into the clinic afterwards. So I think we're really fortunate that they're on board and helping support this study, which is great. So in order to make sure that we follow all the rules and keep patients safe, this trial has to have a sponsor, and that's the University of Birmingham, and they oversee and make sure that nothing goes wrong, that it all works. And then we've got an independent steering committee by Professor Mark. Now, he's a really, really nice chap. He works in the Stem Cell Therapy Center in Paris, and he's got expertise in looking after rare disorders, especially in adults as well. And he's a great supporter of this study, and he's providing invaluable advice to keep it working. And then we've got what's called an independent data monitoring committee. Now, this is the group, and it's chaired by Karen Morrison. Some of you may remember her. She used to deliver the adult Wolfram clinics in Birmingham about 5 years ago. Now, they're completely separate from us as the trial team, and they're allowed to see all of the information from the trial, including they know who's taking the sodium valproate and who's taking the dummy medicine. And their job is to make sure that the study is safe, that nobody's having any adverse events that would cause us to stop the trial, that we're not doing any harm to anybody, and also to keep an eye on the results as well. And as I said, they can see who's taking the medicine and who's not, but they're not allowed to tell us. They're the ones who will have a look at the data at the end of the trial, and they'll tell us as a trial group, has the medicine worked or not? So that's a really important group as part of this. And then below that, we've got the trial management group, which I look after, and we meet with all the site investigators regularly. And then a project management group who do the day-to-day running of the study. So in summary, it's a study to see, does sodium valproate work to slow down Wolfram syndrome or even stop its progression in children and adults? And it's recruited 70 people altogether, and there are two branches to it. One branch is people who are asked to take sodium valproate, and one branch is people who are asked to take dummy medicine. And for every one person on dummy, 2 people have been offered sodium valproate, but they don't know which they're on, and we don't know which they're on. And it's running across 4 countries in Europe and 6 centers. So this is where we're at. 77 people across Europe were consented. We ended up recruiting 63 people. And the reason is because some people, unfortunately, when we came to consent them, didn't have enough vision for us to be able to measure the outcomes from it. And I'm so sorry about this, because of the delays in setting this trial up meant that some people were not eligible when we hoped that they hoped to take part. The youngest person is down to about 66, and the oldest person up to 60. We've got slightly more men or males than females. And you can see there are 25 recruits in the UK, 15 in France, 18 in Spain, and 5 in Poland. And you can see the average age is 18, so young adults. Tracy and John and Gina and others have done a fantastic job, and people supporting Wolfram Syndrome UK, that's really helped participants to take part and travel to Birmingham to take part in the study. So a massive thank you to Wolfram Syndrome UK for supporting this study. You can see here that people have taken part who originate from all over the world, including South Asia, China, Africa, and the Middle East. But the majority, as you would expect, will be white European. And I think there's one from North America as well. So we have had issues along the way that have slowed things up. The obvious thing to do with sodium valproate was to ask the drug company that makes it to support the study. Unfortunately, they really make all their money from treating epilepsy, and there isn't any money in it for them to find a treatment for a rare condition. So we were unable to get their support. But we were able to get guys in St. Thomas's Hospital to source the medicine for us and produce a placebo. But that introduced a 12-month delay because we had to demonstrate that the medicine and the dummy medicine was stable outside their normal packaging to take part in the study. But they've been fantastic and been a great help. And then in order to run it across the European Union and four different countries, we've had to have lots of different contracts in place for money, for samples, and for technical agreements, about 19 different contracts altogether. And they've taken a lot of time to set up and then revise it when we've had to make changes to the protocol. This chart just shows you the recruitment, and you can see we started in 2019, and we had a really good recruitment from about January to about July, mainly in Birmingham Children's Hospital, which is fantastic. And then there was a gap, and then you can see this flat period of the graph on the bottom in 2020, and that's when COVID came. And in COVID, hospitals had to pause recruitment to try and concentrate on looking after people with COVID. And we could keep the trial going, but we couldn't recruit additional people. So we had to wait until the end of COVID, or the end of the first wave of COVID, to start recruiting again. And you can see how France, Spain, and Poland really came to the aid of us in this trial and had a fantastic job bringing people into this study in order to complete recruitment. And we got to 63, which is enough people to get a good result at the end of it. Now, over half of participants have now finished the study, and the last participants will be finishing in the next 12 months. So where are we now? So the remaining people who are still in the study are visiting every 6 months to get an eye check and every 12 months for a brain scan. And we look at both of these to see whether sodium valproate is working or not. They're very kindly completing diaries to show that they're taking the medicine, mood diaries to make sure that people's mood is okay, and sleep diaries to make sure that the treatment isn't affecting their sleep, and also bladder function, because we don't know, but we hope that maybe that bladder function might be stabilized with the medicine as well. And then we're having to do regular safety tests to make sure that we're not doing anybody any harm, and that's good practice that we would always do for anybody taking part in this study. We have recruited enough patients to tell us whether this sodium valproate will work or not. 63 people taking part gives us enough people, plus some to spare, to tell us at the end of the study, has it worked? We haven't had to stop the trial halfway through for safety or others, and that's fantastic. Nobody's come to any harm from taking part in this study, and all the sites have followed the study protocol carefully, so it's been really helpful. And the data monitoring committee has looked at all of the data. If by this stage there was absolutely no evidence that sodium valproate was working, they could have stopped the study for what's called futility purposes. They haven't done that. So that sort of gives me hope that the study will have a positive outcome. Now, at the end of the trial, there are 3 possible things that can happen. Firstly, we might not find any difference in outcomes between the valproate treated group and the dummy treated group. Now, we all hope this isn't going to happen. And anecdotally, having talked to some people taking part, there are plenty of people who feel that that this medicine is hopefully helping them, although they don't know if they're on the treatment or the placebo. The second possibility is that there is a difference between the 2 groups, but it isn't statistically significant. Now, we've taken precautions about that with the medicines regulators, who said that because we're conducting the study to a gold standard, even if we just miss statistical significance, they'll still approve the medicine, providing that other things like hearing, sleep, and brain scans are all pointing in the direction that sodium valproate is working. So we've done all we can to guard against that outcome. And then the final one is that there is a difference in outcomes and it is statistically significant. And that's what I think all of us are sort of keeping our fingers and toes crossed that that'll be the outcome for it. So then what happens? So the last patient, the last visit is going to be this time next year, next October. At that point, everybody finishes in the trial and we collect any outstanding data from the trial sites. And then what we call is lock the trial database, and then our statisticians analyze it. It goes to the data monitoring committee, and they will give us a report sometime early in the new year, 2025. Sorry, they'll give us a result, and then we have to submit a report to the medicines regulators and the funders by March of 2025. So we will know, has this worked or not, between January and March. Now, at that point, if it works, so you will all know, and we will tell you all as well, as soon as we know, through Wolfram Syndrome UK. At that point, if it's worked, we can apply to the National Health Service Early Access to Medicines scheme. Now, this is a scheme that will allow us to prescribe sodium valproate to people who need it, provided that the trial has shown it works, and before the medicines regulators have licensed it. So this means that we should be able to prescribe the medicine to people with Wolfram as early as March 2025. While that's happening, what we do is apply to the medicines regulators to get a license to give sodium valproate to people with Wolfram, and that will be the new indication. And at that point, it goes on the British National Formulary and all prescribing information, so that any doctor anywhere in the UK or Europe can prescribe it for the indication of Wolfram. That may take a little bit longer, but the early access to medicine scheme is the quickest way to get this medicines to people. And for that slightly longer step, we've been approached by pharmaceutical companies and partners who would help us take us through that step. So that's the timeline that we're looking at, we're doing. It's been a long study. It's been fantastic that people have really supported it, and we're so grateful. It means that there is now 63 people who've kindly signed consent that they would be prepared to have their data shared at the end of the trial for other researchers to benefit other studies going forward. Oops. Hang on. It's being phoned by somebody here. We've got that. And we've got standardized MRIs from everybody across who's taken part in 4 different countries. And that's never been done before for a rare disease. So again, thank you to those of you participants or people who have participated, who've had these MRI scans. I know they're not much fun, but it's going to be the biggest cohort of people where we got to understand what's going on in the brains in terms of this pathology, and if this treatment works or not for it. And then finally, we've got a network of centres across Europe who are up and running with the experience to support any new study or any new trial that will come forward. And as I'm sure you'll hear else in the conference, there's lots of plans for other clinical studies after this one of new treatments. And at least we've got a network that will be able to deliver those in Europe. It has been a challenge. It's been a challenge making sure that the medicine is available to use this, especially without a big drug company behind it. It has been a challenge delivering a randomized controlled trial, and I think going forward, regulators are much more happy to have different trial designs that hopefully won't all involve a dummy or a placebo arm. So I think we've learned a lot from this trial. Brexit has been a real problem for us, and it's delayed opening up studies to get these done, and it's been a real spanner in the works, if I'm honest. And of course, COVID. I don't think any of us predicted that COVID would be coming along in the middle of this clinical trial. And I'm just so grateful for people for continuing to take part in it, and the support from the centres to do so as well. And then finally, because of the delays, we've had to engage a new company to make the medicine called Sharp Medical Services, and they've been fantastic. They've been really good. My final thank you is to the UK Medical Research Council that has given us over £2 million to support this study, and also funded the sites in Europe, which has been fantastic. And a massive thank you to the French Wolfram Association, the I Hope Foundation, and the Snow Foundation for their grant given to us in 2018, which has allowed us to collect the research samples and do some of the MRI scans and the other bits that the Medical Research Council didn't fund. And then finally, Wolfram Syndrome UK, who've been absolutely fantastic in helping you as participants to take part and travel to Birmingham to actually enable you to take part in this trial, without which we wouldn't have been able to deliver this at all. And then finally, just to show you how many people are involved in delivering this, this is just the core team really of the trials unit on the left-hand side, the clinical research facilities, the trial steering committees, the international collaborators, and the patient support groups, and then the people in the laboratory who did the work to find that sodium valproate might work in the first place, and then a clinical service team who've been absolute bricks and support all the way through, both in the Children's Hospital and in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to help us do this. I think that's my half an hour up, so I will stop at that point. I'm sorry about the technical issues and not being there with you, but thank you for your time and attention. Okay, can you hear me all right, Tracy? Yeah, fantastic. So Jean has kindly put a question in the chat. Is 1.8 units the maximum that can be given for an adult patient? I think you're referring to the dose of sodium valproate of that thing. What we've done, because we don't know what the dose is that will slow down. No? Can you hear me? You can. Okay. Okay. We don't know what the correct dose of sodium valproate is to treat Wolfram. So by the advice of the regulators, they suggested that we try and ask people to take the maximum tolerated dose to see if we can show that it works, to see if there's an effect. We'll do that. Okay, endocrine, not sodium valproate. Okay, 1.8 units of what? Tracy? Ah, okay, liraglutide. Okay, thank you. Okay, that makes sense. So liraglutide is a new medicine that's used to treat diabetes. The start dose is 0.6. It then goes up to 1.2. It then goes up to 1.8. 1.8 is the maximum dose that is recommended to be given for adults. If you give it, you have to watch blood sugars to make sure that blood sugars don't fall too low. And at the moment, we haven't got a clinical trial to test sodium valproate to improve the vision or the brain disease in Wolfram. But there are plans ongoing to set up a clinical trial of this. Yeah. Okay, so the question I can see is that would this medicine help everybody with Wolfram or just classical? So the answer is everybody. The regulators were very clear that they wanted to try and make sure that the medicine that we develop would be available to everybody with a mutation in a Wolfram gene if it was going to benefit them. So the answer is yes, everybody. Yes, there are issues with pregnancy. You're right. It must not be given to people who are pregnant, or if they're taking sodium valproate, they should take precautions. However, we don't know. We don't know on what timescale sodium valproate works. So it may be that if the treatment is licensed and people want to get pregnant, one has to have a holiday off sodium valproate and then restarts it after the pregnancy. The question about stats in write-up. No, whatever happens, this study will be written up, whether it meets the primary endpoint or not. So this will be published, and all the results will be available, publicly accessible in an open access journal for that. It's the regulator's point is the question. If this study looks like sodium valproate is working but just misses the statistical significance, they'll still consider licensing it, provided that all the other secondary endpoints are moving in the same direction. Okay, side effects of sodium valproate. So because it's been around for 40 or 50 years, we know, we're very clear about what the side effects are, and they're normally divided into side effects that can occur in about up to 1 in 10 people, up to 1 in 100 people, up to 1 in 1,000, or up to 1 in 10,000. So common side effects can be feeling sleepy, potentially, can be sometimes some weight gain, can be sometimes an initial bit of hair loss, but then that can be quite transient and go further. Less common side effects can be, but still reasonably common, could be what's called mood stabilization, people feeling slightly happier on taking it or calmer on taking those medicines. Very rare common side effects in pregnancy that can affect a number of people are damage to the unborn baby, and that's why it's so important not to take it in pregnancy. And then there are very, very rare side effects where medicines can potentially cause liver problems, and that's why everybody taking part, we've been very careful to measure liver function and look out for any rare side effects. Thankfully, touch wood, we've not seen any.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for accommodating me.